Defense attorneys presented their final witnesses in the Cory Bigsby murder trial. The Hampton father is accused of killing his son Codi Bigsby and concealing his body. Dan Kennedy joins us live. Dan, what can you tell us about today's court developments?
Dana, just 6 witnesses called today from the defense after 14 witnesses called from the prosecution over the course of several days last week. I want to bring in our legal analyst, Ed Booth, now to kind of break down where we go from here. Ed, appreciate you making the drive to Hampton once again. Tomorrow morning, we have closing arguments at 9 a.m. when the jury returns. How important is it for each side to get that right, and what do they need to do to be effective?
Well, closing arguments are important. Now, some of the research says that jurors have, in many cases, largely made up their minds by the time that you get to closing argument, but it's key because it gives the lawyers an opportunity to discuss the instructions of law that the jurors were given, and those are important, some more so than others, and it also gives the prosecution and the defense an opportunity to arm some of the jurors who might be decided one way or the other when they get into the deliberation room to help convince their fellow jurors to come around to their point of thinking.
All right, so when they do go into the deliberation room, eventually they will come back. I know this is probably law school 101, but what are some of the outcomes we could hear from the jury tomorrow?
Well, there's 2 charges, and so we could effectively wind up with guilty on both, guilty on one and not the other. I mean, you can debate sort of whether or not it would make sense based on the facts to have, guilty on one and not on the other, but it's, strictly speaking, possible.
Okay, and if they cannot come to an agreement on the charges?
Well, with any criminal case, if a jury cannot reach a unanimous verdict, there may ultimately be a mistrial. Now, that's true in this case, that's true in any other criminal case. The court tries to avoid that, but it's ultimately up to the jurors to reach a unanimous verdict.
We did some research last week, spoke with a researcher who said that 90% of no body cases, which this is one, nationwide come back with a conviction. If this case ends in a conviction, walk us through what is next for jail sentencing.
Sure, of course. Virginia no longer has jury sentencing, so the judges do the sentencing. If someone is convicted, a pre-sentence report is prepared, and that pre-sentence report contains the sentencing guidelines, which are not mandatory, but they give the court sort of a guideline of what similar cases might be getting across the state. So that's what would happen, and then there would be a sentencing date, another date, where a judge would actually impose the sentence, in part based on the guidelines and the other evidence that was put forth during sentencing.
The researcher I spoke to said the reason he believes that 90% of those cases end in convictions is because prosecutors take typically only the strongest cases. Can you have a strong case wwithout a body?
Well, obviously it makes it more difficult, or at least more challenging, because you've got to address that sort of missing element. But, your researcher said it right. Yeah. If prosecutors are taking strong cases, they're getting convictions 90% of the time.
Ed Booth, appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
All right. We will be back coming up in 30 minutes with a full report of what happened inside the Hampton Circuit Court today. Angelique Arentalk will be joining me, and you'll hear more from some of the defense witnesses on the stand. Reporting live in Hampton, Dan Kennedy, 13 News Now.
All right, thank you so much, Dan. 13 News Now is following Bigsby's murder trial until the very end. Our team is in the courtroom following all the developments. You can get updates on air, online, and on 13 News Now Plus.